Hello and welcome. This is documentarybusiness.com, and we're going to do a little webinar for you today. In today's event, Peter Hamilton, in our illustrious panel, is actually going to step back a little bit as a panelist and a participant at both MIPDoc and MIP. My name is Dan Salerno. I'm a senior consultant in the television industry and a big fan of documentary business. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. We've got three guests with us today. Peter, who we've already mentioned. We've also got Liz Levenson of Cactus Tree International, who has joined us for a prior webinar, if you were able to tune in to our Real Screen and NatP event a couple of months ago. And we've got a first-timer with us today, Ann Olzmann from Albatross World Sales out of Germany. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Stan.
Liz, why don't we just get a little bit of introduction to you and Cactus Tree and what you're up before we start to maybe dive into the conversation itself.
Sure. Well, I'll kick this off by saying that I've been going to MIPTV for 17 years. This was the very last MIPTV, so it was very interesting to be a part of it. I'm part of Cactus Tree Entertainment. We are a boutique company that specializes in international co-productions and distribution. I also work very closely with GRB Media Ranch, and I was representing both companies at the market.
Well, great. Well, we'll look forward to what you have to say about MIP. Thanks again for joining us. Ann, tell us a little bit about yourself and Albatross.
Yes, well, I've been running Albatross since 2010, and we're a distribution company focusing on nature, wildlife science, and history, and a bit of travel and culture content. But at this point, we're still a plain distributor of selling projects and films to broadcasters and platforms worldwide. Here, when we're based in Leipzig, Germany.
Well, thank you. Ann is joining us from across the pond, and it's probably a little bit later in the day for her. So we appreciate you taking the time. Peter, why don't we start with you? I think you probably don't need any introduction, but Peter, you participated rather actively in MIPDoc. MIPDoc, for I think our audience is well aware, is the couple of days prior to MIP itself. It focuses specifically on the documentary format. You moderated and produced a couple of panels that maybe you could tell us a little bit about and some of your takeaways.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Look, it's great to be here, and thanks, Liz and Ann, for joining us. Listen, the big takeaway is that MIPDoc is ending as a Cannes event, and that's a very sad moment for everyone in our business. And MIPTV is ending; it's moving to London. So, the first takeaway is, what's happening. And I think it's important for us to remember that the entire ecosystem is shrinking as we move from the channels model, where each and every of the hundreds, if not thousands of channels is buying sometimes hundreds of hours for their primetime schedule day after day, to a much more selective buying model, where streamers and the remaining channels are buying fewer programs. And if the market is shrinking, on the buying side, it means that services shrink. We need fewer lawyers, we need fewer conferences, we need fewer markets, etc. And it's more, there are iterations beyond that, but that's what we've got to remember. However, the market MIPDoc itself was full of really vital conversations, because there were incredibly important for our field, documentary field, buyers there. And my mantra is get out of your basement and go to a market or a conference and target opportunity and wait for serendipity to tap you on the shoulder. And a ton of that happened at MIPDoc, and that made it all the more sad for me that this was the last one. I just wanted to add one little side note to that too, and that is that European public broadcasters have a stronger financial base right now than the legacy channels, and also of say even the US public broadcasting system. And they're still very active commissioners and buyers, and they support quality programming, and that's what we're interested in. I got two other topics to address. Maybe we'll do it later in the webinar, Dan, but I want to headline it here. I had some really interesting observations about the emergence of China, because I presented a case study about on this topic of time, which was a German-Chinese co-production. And that raised some really amazing, fascinating questions for me. And then finally, in our CoPro Summit, where producers and industry participants sit at tables and discuss important issues like AI, etc., I was destined to have the subject of politics and what's the impact of politics on our ecosystem. And I really want to talk about that because I think we don't want to lose as cheerleaders for our industry, that we lose sight of how global tensions are impacting our world.
Yeah, it's thanks for that, Peter. I made a note. I definitely want to come back to those two topics and get some thoughts from Ann and Liz as well, from where they sit. So let me table that for a second. I do find it interesting. I don't think you're the first person to ever say that we need fewer lawyers. But my folks in the legal side of the industry won't appreciate me saying that. Liz, I know you went to MIPTalk. I don't want to say you went to MIPTalk, but I know you've been going to the conferences a few days early rather than sort of showing up in the nick of time and going to meetings on Monday. Talk a little bit about why you show up early and where MIPTalk fit into that. What was your takeaway for those couple of days before you actually got into the Palais?
Well, first, coming from Los Angeles, I always try to get into Cannes a day or two early just to adjust and make sure, my bag gets there on time and all of the logistical things that need to happen to get ready for a market. But I did make a conscious effort at this MIP to be around during MIPDoc, and I was lucky enough to attend the case study that Peter was hosting, which I thought was super interesting, and I'd love to chat more about it because I have just some thoughts about it and some general takeaways as well. For me, representing GRB Media Ranch, we're coming to the market with some very, very hot button political documentaries. So it was very interesting to sort of hear what the feedback was about politics in the marketplace. But for me, those couple of days of MIPDoc allowed me to meet with buyers that did not have time during the regular MIP week. And I was able to get very good time with people on Saturday and Sunday. So I'm very appreciative of MIPDoc. As the concept of what a documentary is changes in the marketplace, I think we traditionally had, what we thought was a documentary. It needed to be a feature. It had to be out in theaters. I think the concept has changed. I think the way programs are being funded has changed. So I think MIPDoc, leaving and not being around for the next few years, or maybe it will come back someday. I would hope so. But I think it leaves a big hole in the marketplace because the concept of documentary is constantly evolving.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of just one of the big takeaways that I got is really, what is a documentary now? We're all selling unscripted television. It's financed by various means, and documentaries come in various formats now. I think the Time project that Peter was talking about, I think it was a 2x60, which is not a traditional documentary as I would have originally thought a documentary was. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Well, great. And I know you tried to attend a little bit of MIPTalk as well. Of course, you're the only one that doesn't have a time zone difference to adjust to. So it's a little bit easier probably for you to hit the ground running, but you still do come a couple of days early, sort of to get out there and get going. How much of that is even driven by, MIP itself over the years has almost become this 2-day event, Monday and Tuesday, as everybody leaves. And it's almost like people are coming on the weekend to get a head start because MIP itself isn't long enough.
Well, I have to say that sometimes Leipzig feels like LA. It actually took quite a while to get there, and I had to go on Friday mornings so I could be there on Saturday morning because there was no flight from Leipzig to Cannes that would arrive in Nice before, I don't know, I think 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So I would lose a whole day. So actually I came Friday. But I mean, yeah, I like a calm Cannes before the storm. So the weather was nice. It was a bit chilly, but the weather was nice. So time to enjoy. And I was really looking forward to it. Also, I mean, of course, from a distributor's point of view, I was really sad that it wasn't the typical MIPDoc that we were used to. I mean, before the pandemic, I will go that far, when they had the library and you had a lot of feedback directly from the clients during that weekend and a few meetings. But once emotionally said goodbye to this form of MIPDoc, I tried to embrace, what was MIPDoc now, and it was actually really nice. And I think the sessions that you've already mentioned, and also the co-production summit, I think these were all really inspiring, and you still get to talk to a lot of people, and you still meet people that you can just run into and have a quick chat. So it was actually nice to have a bit of room for that, the surprise meetings, I'd say. So I think at the end of the day, I really like MIPDoc, though I'm missing the old format, but I know that we have to move on. So yeah, I actually don't regret coming on Friday.
Well, good. It's well, I know that MIPDoc is just sort of the front half of this. The substance of MIP still is MIP itself. We had several different experiences represented here, and you have what would be probably considered the traditional stand with a staff and meetings and appointments, and you kind of base yourself in a hard location, and people come to you throughout. But you told me sort of in our prep calls that your role really as the managing director is to sort of set the strategy and the direction, and you've got a sales team that engages on more of the one-on-one basis, and that frees you up to sort of kind of look around a little bit and see what is going on. And with that in mind, you told me something about a hallway discussion that Peter speaks a lot about serendipity being a very key part of our business. It's not just a random thing. It's almost something you have to account for in these opportunities. Speak a little bit about sort of working the stand and the visitors that you had, and then maybe your hallway successes.
Well, the hallways. No, I mean, I used to be a sales manager, so I know how MIP usually is with meetings every 30 minutes and a different buyer. And it's true that in the last years, we had our prefixed meetings, but there was not much traffic in the aisles. I had my team for all the sales meetings, and I actually got to mingle around and look at other stands and, get some inspiration, go to sessions, but occasionally run into, people that I know that we didn't have meetings with. And so, you chat a little bit and talk about MIPS and previous MIPS and what has changed. And then, yeah, I mean, we came to actually a sales talk where they were looking for something specific, and we had something, and we actually shook hands right there, and it felt like my very first MIP. I didn't have that in years, but all of a sudden it felt like, oh, I remember when I was a sales person in 10 years ago, how you close deals at the stand. People were in front of the stand fighting over your programs, and yeah, so it's a nice farewell event or thing from that I brought back home. Yeah,
I think sometimes those little sort of moments of serendipity are the things that we remember the best when we get home and you've got all the follow-up. Liz, you had a different experience this year compared to your prior events. You've usually sort of been based on a stand and seeing the conference from that perspective. But this year you didn't have a stand, and you experienced sort of the walking around. And talk a little bit about what that did to you, both logistically, but also just in terms of the takeaways that you saw in the conference, maybe that were a little bit different than your prior experiences.
Well, it's interesting. Like I said, I've been going to MIP for 17 years. This was the very first time that I did not have a stand to take my meetings at. With that being said, I feel like this MIPTV was not the typical MIPTV / MIPCOM. It was tremendously smaller than it has been in years past. The entire Palais, for those of you who have been there, the Palais is multiple levels, and usually there are stands that cover the bottom level. This year it was completely closed off, with the exception of a few meeting tables that you could go and just sit down at and take meetings. So I feel like I didn't get the traditional like running around MIP experience, because I actually never had a problem finding a place to meet with somebody. And I was in back-to-back meetings. It was every half hour for 30 minutes for the entirety of my MIP. And I never had an issue finding a place to sit. I do not think that will be the same come October at MIPCOM. I think MIPCOM is going to be the MIPCOM that we know and love. And, maybe with MIPTV wrapping up, MIPCOM is going to become even more crowded than it has been before.
And did you sort of coming back to one of the topics, and this could be Liz or Ann, that Peter mentioned, as you were sort of in your sort of back-to-back meetings and you know, getting a lay of the land, maybe what buyers are looking for. You know, Liz, I know you've got sort of a global set, as does Anne, but you each sort of have, you know, a sort of a regional focus that you're pretty darn good at. Talk a little bit about Peter's comments about sort of where politics is starting to come into play, in sort of what buyers are looking for or maybe aren't looking for.
I mean, I found that, you know, it's either one extreme or the other extreme in terms of we want those hot button documentaries. We want to make a statement. We have an agenda that we want to push versus we don't want to touch it at all. Give us nice shows about wildlife and nature.
Mm-hmm.
I found that most buyers, at least the ones that I was talking to, sort of lean toward, you know, broad genre specific kinds of asks, and that specifically politically minded content was challenging for them. I did hear a very interesting statistic, I think at one of the MIPDoc panels, that said 49% of the world is in an election year this year. So it is on people's minds. I think it will be very prevalent. Election years cause a lot of change across, you know, multiple levels. It can change how audiences want to consume content. It can change the job market in a particular location. So I do think that will have a trickle down effect. In terms of the buyers that I met with, you know, a lot of them are launching new channels and are really just looking for content to fill those channels. They didn't have a specific kind of agenda one way or the other.
Well, it's nice to hear people are launching new channels in an era of consolidation.
Well, a lot of fast channels. I mean, fast was sort of the name of the game, and you know, that could be an entire other webinar with the sort of change of business model, because it really has shifted tremendously. I don't know if Anne saw the same thing, but you know, especially on the wildlife side, there's a lot of channels now that are like, give us everything. We just need worldwide non-exclusive. So if you have it, we want it.
And that's the issue. Worldwide non-exclusive rights. So who's going to pay for that? Yes. That's a whole new discussion, because, you know, wildlife is the most expensive genre, I think, in terms of documentaries that is out there, and it takes a long time. And that's really challenging as well at the moment, because it's you know, the buyers take a long time to decide, so everything is just dragging a little bit at the moment. And I feel, especially for wildlife, that's quite dangerous. And yeah, I mean, yeah, that's.
I found with wildlife, I just want to ask Anne this. I get a lot of buyers either wanting all wildlife and no people, or more people and less wildlife, and it's hard to come to the market with something that's sort of wildlife and people.
Yeah, hybrid. Yeah, that's been our big talk here at the office as well, because I think, I mean, from the German perspective, I know that they're looking for new ways, you know, to reinvent the wheel, if you want, how to do a good wildlife show. And that's always a question. I mean, from a pure sales perspective, you know, where you acquire a finished program, a lot of buyers are indeed saying that, you know, no people, no sign of civilization whatsoever. That sells best, even though I find it's a very pressing subject to include people and our human impact, but that's a whole other webinar as well, so I wouldn't dive into that. But it's true that wildlife films that also feature people or interviews are tougher to sell. That's true. They seem a bit hybrid, and a lot of buyers, you know, they have to buy volume, you know, thousands of hours, so they have their grid, they have their exact needs, and they will not look outside that grid.
Do you feel, Anne, that you know, your library tends to be, or your offering tends to be a little bit more of the traditional sort of genres, if I'm not mistaken? Do you sort of feel some of the things that Peter's talking about with the world of the politics and, you know, current affairs and so forth, or are you a little bit off to the side of that kind of content, not in the conversation?
Yeah, no, we're not doing current affairs really, because it's just a whole different market. It's much quicker because, you know, it doesn't have a long shelf life as wildlife or science or travel. So we try to not go too broad, but rather focus on our niche, because I think that's what you have to do to, you know, be recognized and not be someone who does everything, because there are a lot of distributors who cover everything. So we really try to stick to our niche, and now even more, you know, with the current events. So
do what you do and do it well. It's smart strategy. Peter, you you sort of sort of initiated the insights on where politics sort of set in the nonfiction space. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on what Anne or Liz have shared with us?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And excuse me, I've had a major hay fever attack. Good timing here if I have to drop off.
Welcome to spring.
So we had a panel at the CoPro Summit, as I said, that followed the presentation of our our case study about time, a ZDF Studios, the CMT China co-production. And it was really interesting that the panelists felt that politics were intruding into the development and production and content process. And this is a result of the hardening of positions in the Western world, third world, and all other. And as example given, where a non-political expert was a Russian speaker and was actually in exile from Russia, whose first language was Russian, and he wasn't talking about the conflict at all, but it was deemed that he couldn't speak Russian on this program because the use of the Russian language on this production would incite discomfort and opposition and so on. And people also mentioned the difficulty of focusing on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and they cited the controversy after the documentary award winner at the Berlinale came under ferocious pressure, as did the Berlinale itself for allowing that particular Palestine sympathizing film to win. So these are and then on the Ukraine side, lots of Ukraine films are being funded, probably more than the market can contemplate. So we've just got to be aware of the intrusion of these issues, and I think as a documentary community, we've got to fight back and try and be as open to interrogating issues and pulling them both sides apart.
Yeah, and I think as probably for another day's discussion, I think one of the challenges that we face too as an industry is where are the outlets for those types of films? Because as more and more, particularly in the US, I think, as more and more of the broadcast linear services with their streaming counterparts, they tend to go a little bit more conservative with the topics, and they're not going with these types of subject matters and so forth. The number of opportunities to place those films is sort of thinning out, certainly in the U.S. marketplace, but it is an influence. The other interesting part of the sort of politics, and Liz sort of referenced it, is the impact, say, on sort of governments and policies and regulations and so forth. And here in the U.S., as an election is approaching, depending on how the outcome of that election, it could impact very much industry consolidation here in the U.S. Based on sort of the regulatory environment, which then has that sort of tentacled effect, right, out to the Liz's and the Anns of the world who are just trying hard to place their wonderful programs as a whole. So
Dan, I was going to cut in on and come back to the link between serendipity and wildlife as we discussed it earlier. There's more to serendipity than serendipity. Showing up means that you get to see people and you get to feel comfortable with them, and then over time you have coffee with them, maybe you have lunch, and comfort grows, and out of comfort you can start to have discussions about films. And I had a wonderful experience where a film that I've been working on for 18 months was fully budgeted and contracted just before MIPDoc. It's a wildlife film from South Africa, and it's a co-production with Terramata Studios and PBS Nature are involved. That wouldn't have happened with that whole process of getting to know you by attending markets and I've been going to MIP for about 35 years, I've figured out, and relationships take time, trust takes time. You're very rarely, as Anne mentioned, kind of blown away in an aisle. And we're going to miss MIPDoc and MIPTV, but the message to our viewers and listeners is, find other places you can go And
Well, and actually, sort of piggybacking off that, in the last couple of minutes we have, Liz and Ann, MIP has been a key part probably of your sort of your market and your travel strategy within your own business goals. And you still have to operate your businesses at the levels that existed before the decision to shut down MIP. How, respectively for each of you, Ann, maybe you can start. How do you sort of plan to take on now the gap in the calendar in sort of Albatross's business and replace that sort of opportunity to engage your clients and even develop new clients?
Well, I think we're lucky that there are a lot of events for documentaries still. So we still, I mean, unfortunately, they are now all the second half of the year, which is a bit of a problem, I'd say. But I mean, we will definitely give MIP London a chance and see what this is, and to be this, part of something new. And so that's for next year. But I think overall, we're going to focus on the documentary events that we have: Sunnyside, also MIPCOM, and Science Congress. So I think those are 3 events that are key for us and that work well so far. And I will admit that MIPTV was really expensive. So maybe we'll just also try to go see buyers directly, where to meet them where they are based. So I think that could also be a good strategy.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Liz. Same thing. There's a gap now in your calendar. How do how have you thought about you might replace that gap? And I think Ann raises a good point. The expenses of going to MIP now maybe could be diverted into other expenditures to further your business.
Yeah, and I think they will be. For me, having the loss of a market this time of the year, I feel that, very, very strongly, because, we have a financial year that runs, January to December. So for me, having a market that happens like where MIPCOM is end of October, and it's late this year, that gives not a lot of time to close any deals that will come into this calendar year. So for me, I'm really starting to look at other markets in the beginning of the year or toward the middle of the year that I can go to that I might not have thought about going to. NatP and Realscreen, they have now announced that they are combining next year for NatP Global and Realscreen. I will probably do both of those because that's going to happen at the start of the year. NatP Budapest is also on my potential to go list. That is not a market I probably would have gone to had this, had MIPTV still been, as robust as it had been in years past. So I think that's where I'm going to try to focus my efforts and really figure out strategically what other markets I could fill that with.
Yeah, no, I think that's that's smart. I think everybody's going to probably be feeling their own way, anxiously looking to London to see if it can fill some of that gap, or if there's going to be sort of other ways that folks are going to do it that aren't based in London. How can they do it? Well,
I think I just want to add, I think there was a little concern that MIP London was just going to be a very different market than MIPTV. I mean, for better or for worse. I think it will fundamentally be different. And as television people, we don't love change. So this is it'll take some getting used to.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us as we start to sign off here. Peter, any last single thought you want to share before we say goodbye?
Give me an hour to talk about MIPTV in my life and how much I love it. But thanks everybody for being on board, and really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, very much. I'll echo that. Liz, do you have any last takeaway you want to share with the masses here?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to MIPTV, because it really opened a lot of doors for me, in my career, and I will always be grateful that market existed and I was able to be a part of it for so long.
Nice. And same for you.
Well, I agree. Of course, I will miss MIPTV, but now I'm looking forward to MIPCOM, and I will have to check out La Pizza. I've heard that all the Americans are going there, and I don't know anyone else, so I will have to check what that is about.
I had shared with Ann that La Pizza is the go-to for most of us on our opening nights, and it's the only place that I've ever found in Cannes that you can get pepperoni on your pizza, which probably is a very American thing. But well, thank you everybody for joining us for this discussion. This is always a fun and informative session to have. We hope to continue to do these as part of the documentary business webinar series as we engage in different conferences and markets around the world. Liz, thank you again for joining us. You're now considered a veteran and your rookie experience is behind you. And we really appreciate it. We'll be looking to you for some insights again in the future. Once again, my name is Dan Salerno on behalf of Peter Hamilton and Documentary Business. You can find the newsletter online and it is free. So if you're not already a subscriber, please jump on board. Have a great day.